Welcome inside the War Room. I'm your host, Andrew Valancourt, and we're back today for episode 45 of the Dynasty War Room podcast. On today's show, we are going to officially flip the script to the 2025 fantasy football season and take a look at some rookies. So I've gone through and taken a look at 63 different players that are expected to be drafted in the upcoming 2025 NFL draft, and I've just gone through position by position, laid everything out, stats, height, weight, draft capital, everything. And so I'm going to run through some names. This is not going to be a specific ranking, so to speak. I'll have these players sort of in a general list of where they're projected to go in the draft, but this is supposed to serve as a preview of the rookie class so everyone can kind of get acclimated, get up to date, ready to go on these players that we're going to be spending a lot of time talking about over the next few months leading into draft season. So before we do that, as always, make sure you are following the show. We're on Spotify, Apple, everywhere you can find podcasts. Go make sure you're following the show. Leave us a like on YouTube, subscribe there. The handle is at Dynasty War Room. We're also on Twitter at the same handle, at Dynasty War Room. And you can leave us a 5-star review. That helps the show. We appreciate it. And most of all, just keep tuning back in. We appreciate all the support. And with that being said, let's jump right on into today's show. And let's kick things off at the quarterback position, where it's not the best class of rookies. Let's just say that. This is going to be significantly different from last season, where basically every quarterback has hit. Obviously, we don't know the situation yet with J.J. McCarthy, but, Jaden Daniels, Caleb Williams, Drake May, Michael Penix Jr. looked good in his few starts. Bo Nix has been surprisingly good. So, good class all around last year. Hard to say what this year is going to bring because there just isn't that high-level prospect. I don't know that any of these quarterbacks I don't know that any of these guys, Cam Ward, Shedeur Sanders, would be in the top 3 or 4 in last year's draft class. I feel like it'd be more, we're talking 5th or 6th, 7th even, compared to last year's class. I just don't know yet about these guys. Now, someone is going to go in the top 5. Probably 2 quarterbacks are going to go in the top 5, top 10, simply because that's how the NFL works. These teams picking that high in the draft need quarterbacks. So I fully expect there to be at least 2 first-round quarterbacks this year, potentially 3 or 4. We'll see how things shake out, the combine, how free agency goes in terms of quarterback. But the overarching thought behind this quarterback class, it's not that impressive to me so far, at least on paper and the limited film and games that I have been able to see. Of these players. So, with all that being said, the quarterbacks in this draft class, right now, there are 2 guys, like I just mentioned, Cam Ward, Shedeur Sanders, that are projected to go in the top 10. And Cam Ward, QB out of Miami. Shedeur Sanders, of course, with his dad, Deion Sanders, at Colorado. Both are 6'2". Cam Ward comes in at 223, Shedeur Sanders 215 pounds. Both are 22 years old right now, and in terms of their Pro Football Focus grades, both actually graded out pretty well in college. 92.5 for Ward, 91.0 for Sanders, and both of these guys are solid passers, both over 4,000 yards, 39 touchdowns and 7 interceptions for Ward compared to 37 and 10 interceptions for Sanders, and both are relatively mobile. I wouldn't call either one a rushing quarterback per se, but I would, argue that both are mobile. They're agile guys. They can move around in the pocket. They can create plays when necessary. They can run. They just choose not to do it all the time. Now, Pro Football Focus does a good job of keeping track of rushing stats for quarterbacks without factoring in sack yardage, because generally speaking, if you go to ESPN or sportsreference.com or anything like that to look up stats for players, you will see a much lower rushing total than the numbers I'm going to give you here. And that's because in college, sack yardage is factored into the QB's rushing yards, which I think is a poor way to do things, but that is the way they do it. So both players here, a little over 300 yards rushing when you don't factor in the sacks. So Cam Ward, 44 attempts, 336 yards, and 4 touchdowns, compared to Sanders, who had 64 attempts for 305 and 4 touchdowns on the ground. So both players, pretty similar styles, I would say. They're both, they can create plays. They have a little bit of that kind of Caleb Williams, dance around and wait and then create big plays. But again, neither one of these guys is somebody that I view as necessarily an elite passer. So I think the combine will be interesting, and just kind of the draft process in general. I fully expect one of these guys to go number 1 overall to the Titans, and I would expect there's going to be so many teams here in the top 10 that need quarterbacks. We're talking the Browns, the Giants, the Raiders need a quarterback. There's going to be a lot of shakeup at the position throughout the offseason, so we'll see how things play out. But those are the clear top 2 quarterbacks in this draft class. I don't really know that there's anybody else that could jump into that group right now. However, I do have 10 names, 10 guys that I think probably will be drafted at the position. So I'm going to give you all 10 just so you know the names. I'm not going to go into details on the stats and everything else for the back half of this group. But I do think there are probably 5 players that are going to be fantasy relevant at some point, particularly come draft time, late April and into early May when your rookie drafts are taking place. And number 3 that I want to bring up is going to be Jalen Milroe from Alabama. He's being projected as an early second-round pick right now. I think some people are arguing that he'll pop into the first round as well. 6'2", 225 pounds, 22 years old. A bit lower on the PFF grade, 87, but still surprisingly high. But I think that is one important thing to take note of here is that his rushing grade is actually higher than his passing grade. He kind of reminds me of a smaller Anthony Richardson, just not a very good passer. He does have a better completion percentage compared to Richardson in college, so he's not quite as bad of a thrower. 63% completion percentage, 2,800 yards passing, 16 touchdowns and 11 picks this year at Bama. But he does have 879 rushing yards on 150 attempts, along with 20 rushing touchdowns. So when we're talking about fantasy, Milroe, his value is going to come as a running quarterback. It's going to be the very high floor that you get from that rushing ability, and then whatever you get from a passing standpoint is going to be gravy on top. Now, whether that will be sustainable and be able to land him a starting role, that's a different question. I think we've seen that over the years where you see these running quarterbacks, they have a year or two where they look solid, but because they just can't function as a high-level passer, they don't hold on to those starting jobs. So we saw this with Justin Fields. We are seeing this right now with Anthony Richardson, where it sounds like he's still going to get another year as the starter, but if things go poorly, I fully expect him to lose that job. So Jalen Milroe, somebody to keep an eye on throughout the process, see how teams feel about him, because if he does go in the late first round or a team trades up for him, something like that, if he is given a starting job in the NFL, he's going to have significant fantasy value. Whether that lasts for 10 years plus, I'm not sure, but at least in the short term, if he gets a starting job, he's going to score points. But again, I just don't know how long that's going to last, given his struggles as a passer. Next up is going to be Quinn Ewers from Texas. He declared for the draft this past week after Texas was knocked out of the college football playoff. And similar type of situation to Jalen Milroe in terms of draft capital, probably an early second round pick, potentially a late first. It just kind of depends how teams are really going to feel about him. More of a big arm type of guy, just a pure pocket passer. This is not somebody that's going to scramble and run around. He only has 90 yards rushing on 37 attempts. But solid numbers as a passer, 3,400 yards, 31 touchdowns to 12 interceptions. So a little bit a little bit wild. He will, turn the ball over a little bit. But another player that I think has potential, he was a very highly regarded recruit coming out of high school before transferring, and then transferred from Ohio State to Texas after a very brief stay at Ohio State. So Ewers is somebody that you should be aware of, keep an eye on. I don't know that this is going to be somebody we're talking about as a first-round Superflex pick unless he goes in the first round. But again, quarterback being the most important position, particularly in Superflex leagues, you got to be aware of these guys that might be further down the draft board because a starting quarterback is always going to have value. The next guy I want to mention is the one guy I think that maybe has the best chance of jumping into that Ward and Sanders tier at the beginning, where we've seen the stats. He has talent. He has the size, and that's Jackson Dart, quarterback from Ole Miss, and he's being projected more of like a third or fourth round pick right now. 6'2", 225 pounds. He's only 21 years old, 91.9 PFF grade. And this is a guy that probably, he has a very high rushing floor. He had 100 rushing attempts, 648 yards, and 3 touchdowns on the ground. So, about double what Cam Ward and Shedeur Sanders had in terms of their rushing. But he also was a very effective passer this year at Ole Miss on 399 attempts, which is a bit less than some of these other guys. 69% completion percentage, 4,276 yards, 29 touchdowns, and 6 interceptions. So hard to argue with those stats. So that's where if he tests well, I think the Senior Bowl is going to be very important for a guy like Jackson Dart. We've seen some quarterbacks in recent years play well at that, and that really pushes their draft capital, their status up heading into the combine and the rest of draft prep. So keep an eye on that for him. He's the one guy that I think could jump into that top tier. We'll just have to see how things go. But there are definitely people that are excited about him. I think I even saw one story today that, there are teams that have Jackson Dart in that group already. I don't know about that. Again, you're coming from a system in Ole Miss where it's, very college-friendly type of system. Not sure how that necessarily will translate to the pros, but somebody to absolutely keep an eye on. So there you have the top 5 here: Cam Ward, Shedeur Sanders, Jalen Monroe, Quinn Ewers, and Jackson Dart. Then the next 5 names, guys that I think are all, day 3 picks in some capacity: Will Howard from Ohio State, Dylan Gabriel from Oregon, Riley Leonard, Notre Dame, and then Curtis Rourke from Indiana. I don't expect any of those players to really be fantasy relevant. They're probably all headed for backup jobs in the NFL, but names to know, players that probably will be drafted. They all had very nice college seasons. And I don't know if I skipped over Kyle McCord. I want to make sure I throw his name in too. He had some pretty gaudy numbers at Syracuse this year. So those are the names: Will Howard, Dylan Gabriel, Kyle McCord, Riley Leonard, Curtis Rourke, to go along with our top group of 5 guys that I just mentioned. So there's the quarterback preview. Let's move on over to the running backs, where we have a much longer list of players to go through, as this really is kind of the jewel of the class. This is what everyone's really excited about. So let's kick things off here at the running back position with the guy that everybody has been talking about all season long, and that is Ashton Jeanty from Boise State. So Ashton Jeanty is the consensus 101 in rookie drafts right now, regardless of format, Superflex or single quarterback. Outstanding season at running back there for Boise State, second in the Heisman Trophy race. And now I will say, technically the one format where he might not be the 101 is if you play in an IDP league where you have defensive players. Travis Hunter, probably the runaway favorite for that. But considering that most people don't play with that format, I'm obviously going to focus on Superflex leagues. And so Ashton Jeanty, running back, Boise State, 5'9", 215 pounds, 21.1 years old as of today. So young player. He's got a weight that you like, even though he is a little bit on the shorter side at 5'9". That is a good weight number for him. PFF grade 94.8. Very, very good, highest in the class. And on the ground this year, just if you're not a big time college football person or you just haven't paid a ton of attention, these numbers are eye-popping. It was the second best running back season of all time at college. 375 attempts, 2,595 yards, 29 touchdowns, 4 fumbles. 2 of those coming in the playoff. So not an awesome last game there for Genty against Penn State, but nevertheless, nearly 2,600 yards, 23 catches as well for another 138 yards and a touchdown. So very, very, very productive player. There's not a ton to say about him. He can do it all. He's a full 3-down back. He's going to be a first-round pick in the NFL, and he will absolutely be a first-round pick, first overall, in nearly all of your Dynasty rookie drafts. There may be a player here or there that goes for Ted McMillan, the wide receiver from Arizona, but by and large, Genty is going to be the first overall pick in the vast majority of leagues. Now, this draft is going to be most interesting at this position due to probably about the next 7 to 10 names or so, because this is a really, really strong running back draft class. I mean, significantly better than last year where, outside of Jonathan Brooks, really just not a ton of talent at the running back position. Nobody that really jumped off the page as, oh, this is a, gotta have him type of guy. I don't know exactly yet where Jonathan Brooks would fit into this list of players if he was in this draft, instead. But he certainly would not be first or second. And I would probably say he probably is somewhere in the 5-6 type of range in this class, maybe even 7th. Somewhere in that range is kind of what sounds right to me, because this class is loaded up with running backs that should go on day 2. I don't know that anybody else is going to go first round besides Genty, but we could see 3, 4, 5 guys go in the second round. We should see another handful go in the third round. So if you're an NFL team that is in need of a running back, this is a great year to draft one, because there are going to be a bunch of these guys available that are all, at least on paper, all very solid prospects. So let's just go through the list. And a good tool, and a tool that I use to help compile many of these players, NFL Mock Draft Database is a website that keeps track of NFL mock drafts, big boards, whenever it's put out by pretty much any reputable website out there. And it throws everything together, gives you a nice overall sort of consensus in terms of a big board and mock draft. So using that consensus big board is a good way to figure out, okay, what players are even in the conversation to go in the draft, a relative ballpark as to what round and that sort of thing. Now, obviously, we're really, really early in the process, which is why I haven't gone through and given you full rankings on these players. These players are not in order of how I like them necessarily. They're essentially just in the order of how they're potentially projected to be drafted. So, Omarion Hampton is going to come in at number 2 on this list. Running back out of North Carolina, early second-round draft capital, and he's 6'1", 220 pounds, 21 years old, 87.8 PFF grade. He had 1,600 yards on the ground. He had back-to-back 1,500-yard seasons at North Carolina, 15 touchdowns this past fall, and only 1 fumble. He did also have 38 receptions for just under 400 yards and 2 more touchdowns. So, very productive player, really kept that entire offense going. He was also a key member of that offense when Drake May was there. So, Omarion Hampton's somebody that will absolutely be in the mix as for RB2 in this class. Again, I don't know that that's where I will have him in my first set of rankings. I'm going to take some time to watch some games, do a little bit more research in terms of how these guys all fit together. And rankings always change. I do like to say this, that we're in January right now. The draft, obviously, not till the end of April. These rankings are fluid. They will change all the way up to the draft, and then they will change again dramatically post-draft because draft capital is so important. So anything you hear today, this is, again, supposed to be more of a preview, a learning tool, something to get familiar with names, some of these players, so you can end up, doing your own research and watch your own film and, generate your own set of rankings based on, helpful tools like this podcast, other shows, articles that you read online, things like that. So next up is going to be Caleb Johnson, running back out of Iowa. And he's another guy that's projected early second round. Hampton and Johnson are probably the two names that could also sneak into the first round. I think there's really 5 guys in total that have a chance to do so. The next 2 players who we're going to mention as well likely have a shot. But I would say that right now Hampton and Johnson are the most likely. And Caleb Johnson, 6 foot, 225 pounds. He's more of a bruising, every down, or especially early down type of running back from Iowa, kind of what you would expect coming from that type of program. He's young, 21.3 years old, 86.9 PFF grade. He had 1,500 yards this year and 21 touchdowns on the ground with no fumbles. So we like that. He did have 22 catches, a little under 200 yards, so and 2 more touchdowns. So very, very productive player. He's somebody that absolutely has 3-down capability in the NFL. And something that you might have noticed with all 3 of these players so far is their age. They're all 21. And compared to last year's class, the ages are much better. Last year, we had a ton of running backs that were 23, 24 years old. And this year, that is not the case. It's, we're talking mostly 21-year-olds. We even have somebody, Ollie Gordon's, well, he'll be 21 by the time the season starts. Jordan James, Damian Martinez, 2 other guys under 21 right now. But in terms of guys that are, much older, there's really only 1 or 2 players in this class that are, in the 24-year-old range. So we do really like to see that from this draft class. Age, of course, is very important for running backs. We have also really good size. None of these running backs that we're going to talk about today are listed, at least on PFF, as being under 200 pounds. So that is another very critical piece of information to work with here, knowing that all these guys sort of check that box in terms of size, so you don't have to think too hard about that when it comes draft season. All right, so Caleb Johnson, bigger back that we just talked about. The next guy, the next 2, we'll kind of talk about them together because both are from Ohio State. Quinshon Judkins and Travion Henderson check in at 4 and 5 right now. Both guys, second round projected picks, and definitely an outside shot at a first round draft capital for one or both of these players. Travion Henderson has been sort of a darling of the Dynasty community for a few years because he was such a highly touted recruit. Got off to a hot start at Ohio State, but then he just couldn't stay healthy. So that's been his biggest challenge throughout the years, has been health. However, this year he had Judkins come on over from Ole Miss, and Judkins was the best freshman running back in the country a couple years ago. He was outstanding, and then had a good but not great year as a sophomore, transferred to Ohio State, and then split the backfield essentially 50-50 with Henderson. So Judkins is the bigger back. He comes in at 6 foot, 219 pounds, whereas Henderson is 5'10", 208. Henderson is a year older. He's 22. Judkins is 21. Both with 87 PFF grades. And then both they almost, at least as of today, before the national title game, almost identical rushing yards. 961 for Henderson, 960 for Judkins. Judkins does have 50 more carries and 2 more touchdowns. So 12 touchdowns to 10 there between these 2 guys. But Henderson is a little bit more effective in terms of a receiving back, better pass protector, more of a third down back. So Judkins can still catch the ball. He had 20 receptions, 140 yards, whereas Henderson has 26 and 281 yards. Of course, one of those turned into the long touchdown that we just saw against Texas. So the common thread that I've kind of seen so far is that Travion Henderson is going to be more of that third down, change of pace, I don't want to necessarily compare him to Jahmyr Gibbs because I think Gibbs is a far better running back, but that style, like a Jahmyr Gibbs light, is kind of what he could be. He's going to test better at the combine than Judkins. He'll be faster, but Quinshon Judkins is somebody that I think maybe has a bit more potential to actually take over a backfield and be a 3-down running back. So some of this will just come down to fit, where they go in the draft. But I like both players. I think they both very talented. Judkins is somebody that when you break out as a freshman like that, it catches a lot of people's attention, and it's hard to forget that. And while he obviously didn't have the same type of numbers this year with less than 1,000 yards, although that could still change in the national title game, we do have to recognize that, he's doing that splitting carries with another, day 2 pick in the NFL draft. So if he was still at Ole Miss or at another school where he was the clear number 1 running back, it's very likely that he would, have another 1,500 yard type of season. But, that's not what happened. So we can't just, that's not going to be part of the analysis here. So Judkins, Henderson, numbers 4 and 5 on the list here at the running back position. All right. So now guys that I think right now are probably more 3rd-round picks. I got about 4 of them. Again, which is a great spot to be. If we can get 9 running backs taken in the first 3 rounds of the draft, we're talking all of these guys as being 1st and 2nd round rookie picks in your drafts. So Cam Scadaboo from Arizona State, we all saw the gutty performance that he had in the playoff against Texas. And he comes in at 5'11", 215 pounds, just under 23 years old, 93.2 PFF grade. So he's the 2nd highest graded player on this list. And he did everything for Arizona State on offense. 294 carries, 1,712 yards, 21 touchdowns to 4 fumbles. He also had 44 catches for 543 yards and 3 touchdowns. So very good receiving back as well. So his stats really are second best in the class behind only Ashton Jeanty. The question here, I think, comes down more to athleticism. He should be athletic enough, but will he be, an elite athlete that can really, dominate at the NFL level? That remains to be seen. The NFL Combine is going to be very important for him. So great numbers. Seems to do everything right. A lot of people are excited about him. He had a really, really good season, but he's going to have to test well. And then whether he goes on day 2 or day 3 will be, very important for his value moving forward. All right, the next guy on the list is Nick Singleton from Penn State. Also a 3rd-round projected guy right now, 6'1", 226 pounds, so really good size, 21 years old. 79.2 PFF grade, so a little bit lower than some of the other guys we've talked about so far. He split the backfield with Katron Allen, who is another NFL prospect for next year. And Singleton, a little bit more the power guy. He did have 3 touchdowns against Notre Dame, 1,100 yards on the ground, 12 touchdowns, 41 receptions too. So just under 400 yards and 5 more touchdowns. So definitely has a knack for finding the end zone. Very productive player on a very good team. I think there were some moments where he just, disappeared a little bit. So he's somebody that we'll have to watch some tape on and get more of a feel for, how his season truly went other than just the stats at the end of the year. But for now, certainly somebody that should go on day 2 and has the size and the numbers to be a quality NFL running back. Next on the list is Ollie Gordon, who a lot of people thought would be, in that conversation for 101, the number 1 running back in this class after his sophomore season, where he was outstanding. He had over 1,700 yards, but a pretty rough follow-up to that season for Ollie Gordon. 6'2", 225 pounds. He's not even 21 yet, but he only had a 76 PFF grade. He had 189 carries for 854 yards and 12 touchdowns this year, along with 2 fumbles. He did catch 30 balls, about 200 yards there through the air. So still decent numbers, but, given what we saw the year before with just this, Heisman level running back performance, like, first round NFL draft pick type of performance, we just saw a pretty big letdown here in year 3. So Oklahoma State had a very bad year as well. So, there's a lot of, things that contributed to his down season. He is going into the draft. He probably will still be a day 2 pick unless, more things come out about potential off the field issues or anything like that. But because I believe he got arrested before the season. I think he was a player, and obviously apologies if I'm wrong, but I think he had a DUI before the season. So something to keep an eye on there. But still very talented, had a very productive sophomore year. Can't really forget that. And still was the focal point of the offense this past season. So Ollie Gordon, somebody name to remember. And the combine will be important for him too. And some of these, how he can hold up at that compared to some of these other guys. Is he truly an elite athlete, a really good running back, or is he just somebody that had, one great season in college and then fell back down to earth? That remains to be seen. 9th on the list is Devin Neal from Kansas, the last guy that I have currently projected in the 3rd round, although there could be more. I certainly don't think that we're limited to just 9 guys here, which I think shows how strong this class is, because, looking at 2024, after, only having Brooks and Benson and just not really much, not much else, Wow. This is something where this can change the dynasty landscape a lot. So having this many running backs come in, there's going to be teams, there are going to be free agents in the NFL that don't sign some of these older running backs that are more fringy guys where maybe they signed with the team last year because, hey, there really weren't that many rookies to lean on in the draft. That's not the case this year. There's not going to be any fringe, guys that are hanging around because they're going to be replaceable in the draft. I mean, there's enough running backs in this class that nearly every team could draft a running back somewhere in this draft and be happy about it. So Devin Neal comes in at 5'11", 215. Sorry about the hiccups there. 21.4 years old, 87.6 PFF grade, 218 attempts, 1,262 yards, 16 touchdowns to just 1 fumble. And he also had 26 catches, 266 yards, and a touchdown. So Devin Neal is somebody that could have come out to the draft last year and did not. And then he followed it up with a very good season for Kansas. So fully expect him to be somebody that could move up draft boards. Those numbers definitely stand out to me. And he's somebody that I imagine I will like moving forward. Same with the next player here. So number 10, Dylan Sampson from Tennessee, 5'11", 201 pounds, just turned 20 a couple months ago. So he was 20.3 years old at the time of recording this, and 90.2 PFF grade. So another really high mark there. He had just under 1,500 yards and 22 touchdowns this past season. Did have 4 fumbles, caught 20 passes as well for just under 150 yards. So Dylan Sampson is somebody that I am very intrigued by, seeing those types of numbers. Was in a very good offense. He's the one that from a size standpoint, you worry just a tiny bit about. He's the lightest guy out of all 21 running backs on this list, checking in at 201 pounds. So it'd be nice if he weighs in a few pounds heavier than that. But again, this is where the combine is going to be important. Does he hold up size-wise? I would assume that he probably will do pretty well in terms of the speed testing, but that's all going to be relative to weight. So we'll see how that plays out with the combine. But Dylan Sampson, the number 10 running back on the list. All right, so like we did with the quarterbacks, I'm not going to run through all the stats and numbers for every single player on this list because, again, we go pretty deep. We have 21 names right now at the running back position, but I am going to at least read you the names, where they went to school. But first, I just want to touch on a couple more guys that I think have, day 3 or day 2 potential, guys that could sneak into the third round. I think right now they're probably more fourth round guys. But 3 other names to bring up. One is DJ Giddens from Kansas State. He's 6'1", 212 pounds, just turned 21 as well. And his PFF grade is just a hair under 75. He had 1,300 yards, 7 touchdowns. He also caught 20 passes for 250 yards. So pretty solid player, and he certainly will have a chance to sneak into the back of the third round. And then I'm going to struggle with the names here on this next guy. Bahashal Tutin. I have no idea if that is correct, but Virginia Tech running back, 5'11", 209 pounds, 21 years old, and he is somebody that is being projected right around that same type of range, third, fourth type of player. 1,100 yards rushing, 300 yards receiving, and 23 receptions through the air for him, and then 1,150 yards, 15 touchdowns. And, he's somebody that should get some run in the draft. And then Joquavius Marks, who is more commonly known as Woody Marks out of USC. Another guy could sneak into the third round. 5'10", 208 pounds. He's the one older back in this draft class. He's 24. So that obviously hurts him a bit, considering everyone else is, 21, 22. But very, very productive player. 81.4 PFF grade. But the key thing here is he has 257 career catches. So he did play an extra year. And, obviously that being his 24 years old would indicate that he stayed a little bit longer in college. But this year he had 47 catches, 321 yards. And that was like relatively low compared to some of his other seasons. He was absolutely nuts as a receiving back. And he can run the ball a bit too. He had 198 carries, 1,100 yards this year, 9 touchdowns. So he can do it on the ground too. He's an efficient back, has pretty good speed. And you know that there will be an NFL team that wants to take advantage of his receiving ability and use him, even if it's only as a third down type of player. With the style of football that people play in the NFL right now, these teams, they run the hurry up. They're obviously passing the ball more. We see guys that are not every down players that have a big impact, both in fantasy and in real life, simply because they're elite pass catching running backs. So Woody Marks, a name to keep an eye on there, because I think he can fit into that type of role. Now the next, I'm just going to read off these names in their school here, but these are all guys that we're talking day 3, probably rounds 5 through 7 in some shape or form, with the caveat that some of these names could sneak into day 2 as well, because again, this is very fluid. We're super early in the process. But RJ Harvey out of UCF, Jordan James out of Oregon, Damian Martinez out of Miami, Raheem Sanders out of South Carolina, who he's a guy that very popular among Dynasty players from a couple years ago. He had a great sophomore season and then got hurt, transferred. So a bit, the future didn't work out quite the way that Raheem Sanders planned. But here he is, probably going to be a day 3 pick. Khalil Mullings from Michigan, Phil Mafah from Clemson, and Kyle Mananjai from Rutgers. I have no idea how to pronounce that name, but day 3 pick out of Rutgers, had some pretty good numbers on the ground, 1,200 yards. And then last but not least, Donovan Edwards, also from Michigan. And I mentioned his name not because I think he's going to be a good NFL running back, because I don't. I mentioned him because, he's, big name. People know the name. But I think he's better fit in the NFL as a wide receiver. I think that any Michigan fans that listen to this show would probably agree with me. Just not a very effective runner. He certainly can have those big breakout runs, but he was much more effective as a pass catcher. He had 19 receptions this year, which, not great compared to most of these other players, but you have to think about that in the context of the Michigan offense and that it was just so completely terrible. But we've seen him flash that talent throughout the years. He's been the receiving back, and I think he's much more suited to being more of a slot wide receiver in the NFL. So we'll see if a team moves him to that role. I would be much more interested in him in terms of fantasy if that type of position change were to occur. But again, just throwing him on there as a big name that people know. I think Khalil Mullings is the better running back, but he's not a pass catcher. So I'm not sure what type of future he would really have in the NFL, but we're talking, again, 6th, 7th round picks, somebody that's going to be a short yardage type of guy. Of these names that I mentioned, the one that probably stands out the most, that has the best chance of moving up draft boards, is going to be Jordan James from Oregon. 5'10", 210 pounds. He's only 20 years old. He had an 86 PFF grade, and he had just under 1,300 yards and 15 touchdowns. Can also catch the ball, 26 receptions. So similar to Bucky Irving last year, somebody where, we'll see how he tests, but he's got good size and really good production. So I was down on Bucky Irving last year at Oregon. Don't know if I want to make that same mistake this year on Jordan James. So he's somebody that I'm going to be paying attention to for the combine and throughout this process to see if he can move up this list when we do our actual first set of rankings in about a month or so. Okay, let's change gears here, move over to the wide receivers. And before going player by player here, I do want to say that while the running back class is very deep, there's a lot of solid options, the wide receiver class is not so great. To me, this is pretty similar to the quarterback class, where there should be a couple names on here that first round picks that are highly touted, but the depth is not really there. I don't know that there's a ton of guys that are going to go in the second, third round of your rookie drafts that I'm going to be super excited about at the wide receiver position. More than likely, the players that are going, like your third round and your rookie draft might be, well, even your second round. I mean, you're going to see a vast majority running backs, in my opinion, at this stage in the process, just because I don't know that there's more than like a dozen or so like good receivers in the draft class, compared to last year where we had just a ton of solid receivers. So let's start at the top. I do have 22 names here, but we'll do it the same way we did with the other positions, where I kind of just briefly run through the last 8 to 10 or so. But starting at number 1, Tet McMillan from Arizona, projected to be a top 10 pick, 6'5", 212 pounds, so he absolutely has the size. 21.8 years old, 84.2 PFF grade. He had a 2.87 yards per route run, which is a really good predictive stat. And he had 84 catches for 1,316 yards and 8 touchdowns. So Tet McMillan is the current projected 102 in Dynasty rookie mock drafts right now. So I don't expect that to change. I don't think there is any receiver in this draft class that is even capable of entering the conversation to jump over him in the rankings. I think this is a situation where, depending on draft capital, we might be able to have a conversation about McMillan jumping Ashton Genty, but unlikely to me. I think my 1 and 2, even this early in the process, are pretty much locked in as Genty and McMillan. But again, nothing is set in stone with this. Everything changes all the time. So we'll see. But McMillan, certainly the clear-cut number 1 receiver in this class. At number 2 right now, Luther Burton out of Missouri, another guy that I expect to go in the first round. I'm likely not top 10, but certainly somewhere in the teens or the 20s. And 5'11", 208. He's a bit more of a slot receiver, but he's very, very productive. 21.1 years old, 78.5 PFF grade. Had another solid yards per route run number, 2.32, but he only had 61 catches for 676 yards and 6 touchdowns. Say that 6 times fast. And it was a down year for him. He had a much better 2023 season. Expectations were high. Quarterback play was not great in 2024, but we were hoping to see some better numbers there with him. But he still has all the talent in the world. Certainly could be a very good slot receiver in the NFL. Somebody, I don't know if he'll necessarily be a number one on a team. He could be in kind of the same mold that Amon-Ra St. Brown is, but we'll see. Another player we'll need to test well. We'll see how things go in terms of his landing spot in the draft. But at this stage in the game, he's my number 2 receiver in these rookie rankings. Next up is going to be Emeka Egbuka from Ohio State, another first-round wide receiver, 6'1", 205 pounds, 22.3 years old, an 80 PFF grade, and he had 75 receptions, 947 yards, and 10 touchdowns, and he was overshadowed by Jeremiah Smith, who will be the 101 in 2027. But Egbuka has been just a solid, reliable guy for a few years at Ohio State now. He's never been the number 1. He's always been second behind someone, whether it was Marvin Harrison, or Jeremiah Smith, even going back to the year before. He's always just been a very good, solid player, and that's kind of how I see him in the NFL. I don't think he'll be a number 1, but can be a very good, solid number 2 wide receiver. We've seen plenty of wide receiver 2s be important, successful players in fantasy football, and that's kind of the mold I see him being in as well. So that's why I have him up at 3 right now in this preview. Now, one of the most interesting names that everyone wants to talk about, of course, is going to be Travis Hunter, who is the next name I'm going to raise here. Wide receiver / cornerback out of Colorado, won the Heisman Trophy, plays both ways, certainly going to be a top 5 pick, and he's 6'1", 185 pounds, 21 years old, 86.5 PFF grade, and he had really good receiving numbers. He won the Blinkoff Award for Best Wide Receiver, 96 receptions for 1,258 yards and 15 touchdowns on 122 targets. And Travis Hunter, I think, is a better wide receiver than Emeka Egbuka, and I certainly think he'll be in the mix. He's the one player that if I knew he was going to be a full-time wide receiver, he would probably be the number 2 in this class behind McMillan, but we don't know that he's going to play wide receiver full-time in the NFL. And so that's the big problem, is he wants to play both ways. I am sure that that's how things are going to start with him. I don't know what position he will necessarily be better at. I think the general consensus is that he's probably going to be more of a full-time corner, which would limit his snaps at wide receiver. I don't think it's going to be the same type of thing as college where he plays every single snap all the time. He's going to be more of a, as of right now, I'm assuming he will be more of a, he'll have a package on the offense. He'll play, a certain percentage of the snaps, but he's not going to be out there all the time. And, he'll get 3-4 catches a game, maybe 5, but whether or not that turns into something that's good enough to be a high-level fantasy asset is hard to say, unless, of course, you're playing in a league that you can capitalize on his defensive statistics. But I don't see it. I'm not going to have much of Travis Hunter if he is going in the first round of Superflex drafts, because I just don't think it is a good practice to use, say, the 5th overall pick on a player who's only going to be a part-time player on offense. If he's only getting 50% of the snaps on offense, that's not going to be good enough to return value on that first-round pick. Now, if we find out as this draft process goes on that, hey, he's going to be on the field 90% of the time, he's going to be a full-time starter at wide receiver, he's committed to that, or, hey, he's going to take some snaps off on defense and be more focused on offense. Whatever the case may be, for fantasy football's sake, we want him on the field on offense. And if he's not there, that's not useful to us, and you can't use a top 5 pick on him in a Dynasty rookie draft. So we will have plenty of conversations about Travis Hunter as time goes on. Once more information comes out, obviously he's an incredibly talented player, won the Heisman, as we mentioned. So he's going to be great in the NFL. It's just a matter of, is he going to be great for fantasy? All right, so the next the next group of receivers. We were recording this at the very end of the day here on Sunday. It's been a long day. We've seen some NFL playoff games today, but a bit tired here. So we're pushing through though. Got a lot more names here to mention, and this next group we'll kind of bunch them together. I view the next like 4 guys as the potential second round picks in this draft, and so that's Trey Harris, wide receiver from Ole Miss, Isaiah Bond, wide receiver out of Texas, Alec Ayomanor, wide receiver from Stanford, and then Xavier Restrepo, wide receiver from Miami. So those 4 guys, all projected second-round picks, and those are all players that I would also, if they do get drafted in the second round, they'll be in the mix for late first round in rookie drafts to solid second-round rookie picks, which, valuable picks to have, important players for, your teams and your rebuilds. So we'll start with Bond, who transferred to Texas, didn't have a great season. So I think this is a little bit more on hype right now. 5'11", 180 pounds, 20 years old. He had a low PFF grade though, 68.9. Bad yards per out run number of only 1.78. He had 34 catches, 540 yards, and 5 scores. So, not a great season. I think his stock maybe took a bit of a hit going from Bama to Texas. But, also somebody that if he does hit in the NFL, I think we're talking more of that wide receiver 2 type of mold, smaller guy, thin guy. I'm always a little bit skeptical that some of those small wide receivers are going to hold up. Obviously, the really, really talented guys make it work and are great. Think like Devonta Smith. But I don't think Isaiah Bond is that guy. He hasn't shown that he's an elite wide receiver in college. So I expect him to be somebody that I'm a bit more down on, but we'll see how things shake out. Trey Harris, though, is more of a bigger body guy, 6'3", 210 pounds, 22 years old, 89.8 PFF grade, and he had an incredible yards per route run number, 5.15, which is insane. 60 catches, just over 1,000 yards, and 7 touchdowns. Believe he got injured and missed some time during the season as well. So very productive season for him. Bigger body at 6'3". I could absolutely see him rising up draft boards and sneaking into the first round. That would be a big boost to this rookie class if we can get another first round receiver. Ayomanor from Stanford, another guy, big body, good size, 6'2", 210 pounds, 21 years old. But not the greatest, season in terms of metrics. 73 PFF grade, 1.9 yards per route run. But he did have 63 receptions for 831 yards and 6 touchdowns. So another guy, just kind of have to see where these guys land in the draft, because whether you're a second round pick, third round pick, it's a bigger difference at wide receiver than it is for running back. So that'll be something to pay attention to. Restrepo from Miami, 5'10", 198 pounds. So he's a bit of a smaller guy, 22 years old. And he had a good season, though, with Cam Ward. 69 receptions for 1,100 yards, 11 touchdowns. And then shifting on to our third-round players, another group of about 5 players or so. Savion Williams, wide receiver from TCU. He's another big body guy, 6'5", 225 pounds. Older prospect at age 24. Jaden Higgins, wide receiver at Iowa State. 6'4", 215 pounds. He's only 22 years old, though, and he had a 90 PFF grade, 2.66 yards per route run. Very good number. And Jaden Higgins, based on these numbers, is somebody that I could see myself really liking as a later round prospect. He had 87 catches for 1,185 yards and 9 scores. So more productive than some of the other guys in this range, like Savion Williams, who only had 600 yards. Tez Johnson, who is the next player I'm going to bring up, he only had 900 yards. So Jaden Higgins, if you are somebody that really values production over the hype and projection, you're going to probably be a fan of Jaden Higgins. So Tez Johnson, like I just mentioned, he's another guy, probably a third-round pick. Another slot receiver, very small, 5'10", 165 pounds, 22 years old. So he was the leading receiver for Oregon, 82 receptions, 900 yards, 10 touchdowns, but I don't know that size is going to play super well. We've seen Troy Franklin struggle a bit in the NFL out of Oregon too, so a little bit skeptical there of Tez Johnson. A third-round pick as of right now from a small school, Utah State, is Jalen Royals, and his numbers really stood out to me. These small school wide receivers can be very hit or miss. However, Royals, 6 foot, 205 pounds, 21.8 years old. He had a 79.6 PFF grade and a 3.0 yards per route run, which is very good. He suffered a foot injury during week 8 that knocked him out for the rest of the season. But through those first 8 games, he had 55 catches for 839 yards and 6 touchdowns. So really strong numbers there. You could, do the math there on what another, 4 to 6 games would do for those numbers. And he's an outside wide receiver. This is an X receiver. This is not a slot guy. So I'm not as skeptical of Jalen Royals as I was of like Malachi Corley last year. I think he's a bit better of a prospect. So I am excited about that and excited to see a bit more of him since obviously being at Utah State, not a lot of nationally televised games there. So he's somebody we'll have to dig into a bit more. And then the last guy that right now is being thought of as a third-round name is Matthew Golden from Texas. And he had a better season than Isaiah Bond. But 6 foot, 195 pounds, 21 years old. And he had just under 1,000 yards. I think he got hurt in the playoff in the last game of the season there too. So wasn't able to make as big of an impact. But he was really the number one over Isaiah Bond, who is somebody that gets a lot more draft hype. So kind of interesting to see that dynamic, and will be an interesting storyline to follow throughout the spring. Now the next, 8 to 10 names or so, here we got 14 through 22. So I'm just going to go through these names. These are my day 3 players as of right now, and there will certainly be more. There's always a ton of wide receivers at this stage in the process that are going to go, 6th and 7th round that we don't know much about. So for now, these are the names that stood out to me based on kind of an initial run through. We got 2 guys from Maryland, Ty Felton and Caden Prather, both 4th round guys right now, big targets, especially Prather. I'm not sure how to pronounce that, but Felton is 6'2", 186 pounds, whereas Prather is 6'3", 210 pounds. But Felton was the more productive college player. So he had 96 catches to Prather's 56. He had almost double the number of yards, 1,100 versus 600. And Felton was the better red zone target too. He had twice as many touchdowns. So I, as of right now, do prefer Felton, but Prather has the size. So we'll see how the teams, analyze that come draft season. Jack Beck from TCU, 6'2", 215 pounds. He was an LSU transfer. So obviously that's something that stands out a bit as, LSU has produced a lot of really great receivers. He had a very good season at TCU. But he couldn't hack it at LSU. So, although he did have a solid production as a freshman. So interesting to see that he'd moved on, but, that's a day 3 name to watch. Torrey Horton from Colorado State. He was injured for most of this year. He only played 5 games, but he had a very good 2023 and was off to a nice start this year before getting injured. Ja'Cory Brooks from Louisville. And, he's a Bama transfer, so Alabama going to Louisville. And but he's 6'3", 185 pounds, had 1,000 yards receiving. And another transfer, Ricky White out of UNLV. He transferred from Michigan State after his freshman year. He had a very productive season at UNLV, 78 catches for over 1,000 yards as well, 11 touchdowns. Pat Bryant out of Illinois, 6'3", 200 pounds. He had a nice season for the Fighting Illini. And then rounding it out, we have Nick Nash out of San Jose State, who put up incredible numbers. He's 6'3", 195 pounds. And he had 104 catches for 1,382 yards and 16 touchdowns. But the problem with Nick Nash is that he's a sixth-year senior. He's almost exclusively a slot receiver, which is interesting given his size. But, tall, skinny dude, and, 6 years. So he's a much older prospect. I think he'll be somebody that maybe we're talking as a 6th or 7th round guy. And then Kobe Hudson out of UCF, 6'1", 200. A solid year there for UCF. But again, we're talking, probably a 7th round pick. So those are the names. I'll run through, the names here one more time in case you missed any of them. But in order, Tet McMillan, Luther Burden, Emeka Egbuka, Travis Hunter, Isaiah Bond, Trey Harris, Alec Aomanor, Xavier Restrepo, Savion Williams, Jaden Higgins, Tez Johnson, Jalen Royals, Matthew Golden, Ty Felton, Caden Prather, Jack Beck, Torrey Horton, Ja'Cory Brooks, Pat Bryant, Ricky White, Nick Nash, and Kobe Hudson. So there you have it. That's the wide receivers to know here in the 2025 rookie class. Shifting gears over to the tight end position, much fewer names. So don't fear, we're nearing the end here. But this is a really good tight end class, especially at the top few names here. Tyler Warren is going to be the first guy I bring up. Tight end out of Penn State, locked in as a first-round pick. 6'6", 261 pounds. He's 24 years old, 91.2 PFF grade, 2.77 yards per route run, and he had an insane season as a receiver. 104 catches, 1,230 yards, 8 touchdowns. He also had 218 yards rushing with 4 more touchdowns on 25 attempts. So Penn State would get him the ball however they could. Really good athlete. I'm sure he's going to test well. And he won the award for the best tight end this season. And he's the first of what I think are 3 very, very good tight end prospects in this draft. The next guy is going to be Colston Loveland, tight end out of Michigan. He's also locked in most likely as a first-round pick. And he's 6'5", 245 pounds. He's only 20.8 years old. So I could see teams favoring Loveland given the age. I also could see Loveland ending up as tight end 1 in this class. When you factor in age and his skill set, 84.7 PFF grade, 2.67 yards per route run. And his numbers are much less than the other 2 guys at the top of this class. But again, we're talking about the Michigan offense. He was the leading receiver by a significant margin. He had 56 receptions, 582 yards, and 5 scores. And he has been somebody that, everyone around the country has known that he's one of the best tight ends in the country. He missed a game or 2 due to injury near the end of the season, but certainly is locked in as one of the first 2 tight ends off the board. Next up is going to be a small school guy, Harold Fannin Jr. out of Bowling Green. Right now I have him as a second-round pick, 6'4", 230 pounds, 21.4 years old. He had a 96.4 PFF grade, which is the highest out of anybody in this class. 3.76 yards per route run, which is an insane number, especially as a tight end. He had 117 catches for 1,555 yards and 10 touchdowns. So really, really productive year at Bowling Green, and just an absolutely elite college tight end that has the production and the numbers to be an early NFL pick and make that same sort of impact as a receiving tight end in the league. So between Warren, Loveland, and Fannin Jr., I really like those tight ends. If I'm picking in the late first round, early second round, I'm hoping that I can nab one of those guys, especially if you're sitting, early second, one of those first couple picks. I think you're in a prime position to get certainly the third of those 3 names, but I think that whoever gets drafted second in the NFL draft is going to have a chance to make it to the top of the second round. I'm assuming that whoever goes first will be more of a late first round rookie pick, but nevertheless, good class, good spot to be if you need a tight end at the back of the first round, early second round, and 3 very good names there. Now, Mason Taylor is going to be the next guy out of LSU. Projected third-round pick. I got 2 guys here as projected third-round picks. He's 6'5", 255 pounds. He's only 20 years old. A bit of a lower PFF grade this year at 68, and a low yards per out run at only 1.2. But he did have 55 catches for 546 yards and 2 touchdowns. He is related to some big-time NFL veterans, I believe. I think he's like the nephew or something of Joe Thomas, if I recall. So I'd have to double-check that. But I know he has some relatives that played in the league. So if you're into the whole bloodline thing, Mason Taylor could be your guy. Next up is going to be Gunnar Helm, tight end out of Texas. My other third-round guy right now, 6'5", 250 pounds, 22 years old. And again, a lower PFF grade at 62, but 60 catches, 786 yards, and 7 touchdowns. Pretty productive year through the air down at Texas. And the next 5 names here, again, once you get past the third round in terms of tight ends, it's tough to project what they'll be in terms of fantasy. So you're really only interested in top 3 round guys. But since we don't know, who's going to sneak in there, I'll give you the last 5 names here on the list. So we have Oronde Gadsden II out of Syracuse. He's the one guy I have projected in the 4th round. And he had a very good season. He had 73 catches for 934 yards. So from a statistical standpoint, was really the 3rd best tight end on this list. Jake Brittingstool out of Clemson, 5th round pick. He's another big dude at 6'6", 240 pounds. And Terrence Ferguson out of Oregon, another 5th round guy. Luke Lachey, or Lachey, I'm pretty sure it's Lachey, from Iowa. So another 5th round guy. I can't get through a year at tight end without somebody from Iowa. And I mentioned him almost entirely because he's an Iowa tight end, because his numbers really weren't that good. He's an older prospect at 23 years old. He only had 28 catches for 231 yards, no touchdowns, low PFF grade at 60, only 1.1 in yards per out run. So I really don't like anything about him as a prospect. We're talking about Luke Lachey here. But it's hard to just entirely rule out a guy that went to Iowa and plays tight end. So pay attention to the combine for a guy like him. And same with Oscar Delp, who's the final guy on this list, tight end from Georgia. We're talking late day 3. Was a big time prospect, but he just didn't really amount to anything. He might be more of a blocking tight end because his receiving numbers just not that great. Only 21 catches, 248 yards. He's younger. He's only 21 years old, but 56 PFF grade, very low yards per out run. We're talking about a guy that's not going to have a fantasy impact. So, it's going to be more of, if you're looking for a sleeper on day 3, we're talking more about Gadsden or Brittingstool or Ferguson, who all had very productive seasons in terms of stats. Gadsden's probably the best of that bunch. But in all reality, if you're going to get a tight end in your rookie draft, you're going to want it to be, certainly one of those top 5. But if you can get one of those top 3 guys, you should feel pretty good. I think all 3 of them would have been they would have been behind Brock Bowers, but they all would have been, very much above Ben Sinnott, who was tight end 2 last year. So very strong class in that regard, especially considering, of course, that Brock Bowers was the best tight end prospect we've seen basically ever. So very, very good follow-up class here at the position. All right. We have made it through. It's been a long episode, so thank you if you have made it this far. But I wanted to give everyone a primer on the rookies, really just talk through some of the names, give you something to work with as we enter, Senior Bowl and Combine, and we start seeing mock drafts and all that sort of thing. Just names to work with. A little bit of a different structure than last year, where I just launched, right into my first set of rankings, but that also happened to be in mid-February. So a bit different. We're doing this one a little bit sooner, just getting a preview out the door so you can think about these names as you go through your process. So thank you all for listening. We will be back. We're going to have some startup content coming as we approach that time of year. And, of course, more rookie content as well as we start to really dig into these players to get you primed and ready for your rookie drafts. So thank you all for listening. This is the Dynasty War Room Podcast. I'm your host, Andrew Valancourt, and we will talk to you all next week.